Recently, I was in a world of pain trying to get Ruby installed on my MacBook. You might be thinking, it's almost 2024. What's so hard about installing a programming language and toolchain on a MacBook? But there were complications. My MacBook runs on the Apple Silicon, which means that it understands the ARM64 processor architecture or ARM64 instruction set. The program that I want to install Ruby for needs the Intel architecture. Why does it need the Intel architecture? Because it needs to make a connection to an Oracle database, and making a connection to an Oracle database needs the Oracle client libraries, which unfortunately are available only for the Intel architecture. Fortunately, Apple provides the Rosetta 2 translation layer just for these situations. Rosetta 2 can take a Intel binary, that is a library or an application which emits Intel instructions, and transparently translate that to the ARM64 instructions that the Apple Silicon can execute. While Rosetta 2 makes it possible to run such programs, it doesn't mean it's easy to do. To get Ruby installed, I had to coordinate the entire toolchain used to build Ruby and make sure they all point to the right architecture, which means the shell, brew, which is used to install libraries like OpenSSL, which is then used in the Ruby compilation process. All right, that's enough theory. Now let's look at what does it take to do this. First, you install Rosetta 2. Step 2, you set up your terminal to run in the Rosetta mode. Step 3 is installing brew for the Intel architecture. Step 4 is installing RBM and Ruby build or whatever is your Ruby installation mechanism of choice. And step 5 is finally installing Ruby. We're at step 1 now, where we're going to install the Rosetta translation layer. So open up a iTerm window and type up software update -- install -Rosetta and hit enter. I'm not going to do this because I've already got Rosetta 2 installed on my machine. Our next step is to make it easy to open up a terminal that runs applications using the Rosetta translation layer. I'm going to call it, creating a terminal that can run in the Rosetta mode. We want to do this without blowing away the ability to execute programs in the ARM64 mode. To do this, open up Finder, and in Finder, open up your applications directory. Find the iTerm app or the iTerm 2 app, as the case may be, and duplicate it. This will create something like an iTerm copy. Now, the reason you're duplicating it is you don't want to blow away the original iTerm, which will help you run the ARM64 applications. Go to Get Info in the duplicate and make sure this checkbox Open using Rosetta is checked. You can also rename this to Rosetta term or something similar. Something like this. You want to test out whether step 2 worked. For this, open up an iTerm and type in Arch in here. This should say ARM64. This shows that you haven't blown away your original iTerm. Now close this and open up a Rosetta iTerm this time. If you type in Arch here, this should say i386, and this is your Rosetta terminal. On to step 3. We want to install Brew for the Intel architecture. If you're a developer, you probably already have Homebrew installed for ARM64. And you might have noticed that this is just a shell script. So why do we need a shell script for the Intel architecture? You don't actually. What you do need is a location from where Homebrew can install the libraries that you need for the Intel architecture, and from where you can pick it up during the Ruby installation process. If you look at the Homebrew website, you will see the documentation which says that when it is ARM architecture or Apple Silicon, Homebrew uses /opt/homebrew, and when it is the Intel architecture, it uses /user/local. Installing Homebrew for Intel is just like installing Homebrew for the first time for ARM architecture. You go to the brew.sh website, copy across the installation instruction, switch over to the terminal, make sure that you are in the i386 architecture terminal, paste the script and run it. Now I'm not going to run it because I already have Brew installed for the x86 architecture. And here's how I verify that I do have Brew installed, right? I cancel out of this and then I look for what's in my /opt homebrew. This of course is my ARM64 homebrew. Similarly, I go to /user homebrew. There you go. I have the user local homebrew as well, which is my Intel homebrew. To make the Intel homebrew easily accessible, I have also set up an alias called iBrew for Intel homebrew. This alias will come in handy later. You'll see. On to step 4. We need to install RBenv and Ruby build, or whatever is your Ruby version manager of choice. This is fairly straightforward. I go to terminal and I do brew install rbenv and ruby-build. Again, I'm not going to do this because I have those tools already installed, and quite likely you're using some other Ruby version manager. We're finally ready for step 5, actually trying to install Ruby on our machine. Step 5 should be simple. Let's see what happens when we do rbenv install 3.2.2 in our terminal. Well, that didn't work. Let's try and figure out why. So the results have been logged here. Let's open that up. I will pipe that to more, and it said found an error. So obviously we will look for error. And if you look at this error, there's a bunch of stuff here. But after a long time, what caught my attention was this bit here. So compiling the Ruby executable is actually using readline from /opt/homebrew, which is the ARM64 version. And we need to figure out how to tell it to use the Intel version of readline, right? Of course, I didn't know the answer to this. So Google to the rescue. With Google's help and a lot of trial and error, I found out a magic invocation that needs to be set in order to tell rbenv where to find the various libraries that are needed while compiling Ruby and to pick up the right versions of those libraries. And that is by using this environment variable called Ruby configure opts. What does this mean? Let's look at this bit here, right? It's saying you have this ibrew -- prefix OpenSSL at 3, right? Let's execute that and see what happens. ibrew -- prefix OpenSSL at 3 points to /user local opt OpenSSL at 3, which is the Intel library. So by saying with OpenSSL with OpenSSL directory equals this ibrew prefix OpenSSL 3, we are giving the Ruby configure options the correct location of the Intel library, Intel version of the OpenSSL library. That's what we're doing. And we're doing the same thing for readline, for libyaml, for zlib, etc. Right? Now we can finally do rbenv install 3.2.2 and expect it to succeed. And finally, we have 3.2.2 installed. To recap, we started by installing the Rosetta 2 translation layer. Then we set up our terminal so that we can easily run programs in the Rosetta mode. Then we installed Brew, rbenv, and Ruby build for the Intel architecture. And finally, we had to configure Ruby using the Ruby configure options to point it to the Intel versions of the libraries it needs during the install process. This journey took me quite a while, but hopefully this video helps shorten your journey. Good luck.